Hello, and thank you for listening to Texas History for Kids. I'm your host, Michelle Gallegos, an educator, writer, history nerd, and novice investigator. Each week on the show, we will learn about interesting parts of Texas history, from battles and historical figures to the odd and enchanted. Welcome back to Texas History for Kids. This is episode 77, and I'm your host, Michelle Gallegos. Let's start off today's episode with Zoe's big question.
Okay, listen to this. We have learned that most Native Americans didn't leave behind big buildings or things that could last forever. But does that mean they aren't as important as other cultures? Because I don't think that's fair.
You're right, Zoe, and today's story proves just that. We're talking about a group of Native people who once lived all across South Texas, but who often get left out of the history books.
So far on the Native People Spotlight series, we've talked about Caddo, Karankawa, and the Apache. What is the last tribe we're going to learn about?
Today's episode is about the Comanche people, and trust me, their story deserves to be told. In a glass case at a museum somewhere in Texas, there are artifacts looked over by people hundreds of times a week. I wonder if they truly know what they're looking at isn't just history, or a memento, or a keepsake. They are remnants of real people, actual people who lived long ago and used those items daily. Whether it was for hunting, gathering, basket making, building, scraping, or even for war. Regardless of what it is now, what's more interesting is what it was. Today we're talking about a group that once ruled the southern plains with unmatched skill and fear. They called themselves the Nermerna, the people. But history remembers them by another name, the Comanches. Today on Texas History for Kids, we're headed over to the grasslands of 18th century Texas to uncover how a tribe of Shoshone-speaking hunters transformed into the most feared horse warriors of the American West. Anthropologists tell us that long before the Comanches thundered across Texas, they were actually mountain people, part of the Northern Shoshone of the Great Basin. They hunted, gathered, and traveled on foot. But sometime in the late 1600s, everything changed. They got horses called mustangs. And like a spark meeting dry grass, their way of life caught fire. Horses are not easily tamed animals. In the 1600s, they ran wild. First, they had to be caught, which was not easy as mustangs were known to travel up to 30 miles per hour, much faster than humans. Then, they had to corral them into one location. And after all that, they were horsebroken, the process of taming a wild horse. At first, the horse would kick, buck, and try to escape. But the Comanche had to be brave and stick with training the animal. This process could take days or even weeks. But once trained, a Mustang became one of the most valuable animals on the frontier. They were strong, fast, and able to travel long distances across rough terrain. The Comanches became the masters of warfare while riding horses. Super fast, yet sometimes quiet, and almost mythical in their riding skills. They could hang off the side of a galloping horse and shoot arrows at their enemies with deadly precision. It wasn't long before they broke away from their Shoshone family and headed south, where the land and the buffalo were everywhere. The name Comanche comes from the Ute word Comanchea. It means anyone who wants to fight me all the time. The Spanish adopted it. The world remembered it. But the Comanches weren't just a single tribe. They were a nation of different bands, which moved They were flexible, but they were also independent. There were 5 major ones. The Penateca, or the honey eaters who roamed central Texas. The Cotsoteca, the buffalo eaters. The Yamparica, the yap eaters, named for a root. And the Quahati, or the antelopes, the fiercest of all, who ruled the Llano Estacado. Buffalo was considered their lifeblood. It wasn't only used as a source of food, it provided shelter for them too. Teepees were covered in buffalo hide stretched over 16 to 18 lodge poles, which were made out of pine, cedar, spruce, or cottonwood trees. Buffalo also provided clothing which consisted of breechclout, leggings, and moccasins for men, and fringed skirts and poncho-style blouse and leggings, and moccasins for women. Buffalo robes also provided protection from the cold weather. While the buffalo provided all the essentials of life, it was the horse that most clearly defined the Comanche way of life. For them, the horse wasn't just transportation. It was a tool, a weapon, and a treasure to hold on to. Children learned to ride at an early age, and both men and women became expert riders. Other than buffalo, they ate what the land provided for them, such as wild roots, fruits, and nuts, all things that were able to be traded with neighboring agricultural tribes, mostly the Wichita and the Caddo groups to the east, and the Pueblo tribes to the west. The Comanche had a political system that was pretty much democratic, similar to what we have in America today. That means that leaders don't just make the rules on their own. They listen to the people. Each group within the tribe had leaders for times of peace and leaders for times of war. Even though there were different types of chiefs, the peace chief was usually the most respected. Leaders didn't inherit their roles. They earned them by showing talent, bravery, or wisdom. But they only stayed in charge for as long as the people trusted them. If the group didn't think someone was good at doing their job, they could choose someone else. Big decisions were made by a group of chiefs, led by a main chief. However, no one was forced to follow what the group decided. People in Comanche society have a lot of freedom, and that independence sometimes made it hard for them to work with the European settlers, who were used to stricter rules and more control. By 1743, a small group of Comanches showed up in San Antonio, Texas, not to trade, but to track their sworn enemies, the Lipan Apaches. The Spanish didn't know it yet, but they were in the middle of a war they didn't start. 15 years earlier, 2,000 Comanches and their allies tracked the Apache to a Spanish mission that had been built for them along the San Saba River near Menard, Texas. The Comanche attacked the mission and burned it to the ground, killing a total of 8 people, including 2 priests. The Spanish tried to counterattack in a day-long battle with the Comanches, but they failed miserably. The Spanish soon realized they couldn't beat the Comanches, so they tried something else. They tried trade, making treaties, giving gifts, and calling for peace. Now, Spain's first real success in dealing with the Comanches came in 1762, when a Spanish friar named José Calahorra y Sáenz made a peace deal with them. The Comanches agreed not to attack the Apaches, who had joined the Spanish missions. But that peace didn't last because the Apaches kept attacking, and the Comanches couldn't keep their promise. Eventually, Spanish leaders gave up on trying to stop the fighting and instead decided to team up with the Comanches to try and wipe out the Apaches. Now, this became official in 1772. A French trader named Athanase de Mézières, who was working for the Spanish government, helped to make another treaty with the Comanches. That same year, a Comanche chief named Povea signed the agreement in San Antonio, promising peace with the Spanish. However, not all Comanche groups agreed, and some kept attacking the Spanish settlements. In the early 1780s, Comanche raids increased, and Spain worried that they might lose control of Texas. So, the Spanish governor of Texas at the time, Domingo Caballo y Robles, was told to try for peace again. So he sent two men, Pedro Vial and Francisco Xavier de Chavez, into Comanche territory with gifts and peace offerings. It worked. The two men returned to San Antonio with three important Comanche chiefs who were trusted by their people to make important decisions. In 1785, the Spanish and the Comanches signed another peace treaty. This time, the Comanches mostly stuck to the agreement until the end of the 1700s. In the early 1800s, Spain's power in Texas started to weaken. Spanish officials couldn't keep up with their promises to give the Comanches the gifts that they had been giving them and trading goods, which had helped them to keep the peace. So without those supplies, the Comanches returned to raiding Spanish settlements, especially to steal their horses. Why horses? Well, because American traders were starting to enter Texas from the United States, and they were happy to trade with the Comanches. They offered guns, ammo, and other goods in exchange for horses. This created a booming horse trade, and the Comanches took full advantage of it. In 1836, when Texas became independent from Mexico, the Comanches and their allies were still in full control of the Texas plains. They weren't part of the new Texas government, and they didn't plan to be. Comanche warriors continued to launch frequent raids to frontier towns and settlements, hitting places as far apart as San Antonio and northern Mexico. They were still a major power in the region, and they wanted everybody to know it. The buffalo were vanishing, the Spanish were weakening, and new settlers, Americans, were pouring into Texas. By 1836, Comanches still ruled the Texas plains, but then came the attack on Fort Parker, a violent raid that would change Texas history. They took 5 hostages and killed several settlers that day. Among the captives, a 9-year-old white girl named Cynthia Ann Parker. She would become the wife of Chief Petanacona and the mother of the future legendary Juana Parker, who is famed as the last great Comanche war chief. But during this time, peace remained out of reach. Texas President Sam Houston wanted trade and peace. However, that ended 2 years later, when in 1838, a new president, Mirabeau B. Lamar, took office, and Lamar didn't want peace with the Comanches. Instead, he wanted war. In 1840, a peace meeting turned into a massacre at the city council house in San Antonio. 35 Comanches were killed, including 12 chiefs. Comanches retaliated almost immediately, raiding the towns of Victoria and Linville and burning them to the ground, leaving 25 Texans dead. Later that year, Texas Rangers struck back at the Battle of Plum Creek. Dozens of Comanches fell. Then, a final blow came when Colonel John Moore destroyed an entire Penateca camp. Texas won, and the Comanches were removed from the borders of Texas, but the scars would last for generations. In 1841, Sam Houston was once again the president of Texas and immediately began putting his peace policies back in place. But no doubt, the Comanches were hesitant and suspicious of the peace treaties. They hadn't fared well in the past. So the Comanches continued to raid. In 1844, the Comanches finally agreed to meet with Texas leaders at a peace council. During that meeting, well-known Comanche chiefs like Buffalo Hump signed a treaty that promised peace and trade between the two groups once again. But there was a big problem. They couldn't agree on where to draw the line between the Comanche land and Texas land. Without clear boundaries, trouble was bound to happen, and it sure did. By 1845, tensions had risen again, and peace between the Texans and the Comanches started to fall apart yet again. Buffalo were scarce, disease, war, and white settlement chipped away at the Comanche numbers, little by little. In 1854, the Pennateca, broken by conflict, moved to a reservation in what's now called Throckmorton County. The wild freedom of the Comanches was fading. In 1859, the United States government moved the Comanches living in Texas reservations to Indian Territory, now Oklahoma, giving them land near Anadarko. They were then placed under Wichita Agency, but since these Comanches hadn't been responsible for recent raids, moving them didn't fix the problem. In fact, attacks increased, especially during the Civil War, because most soldiers were off fighting, leaving the frontier unprotected. And as a result, settlers west of a line from Gainesville to Fredericksburg had to abandon their homes. After the Civil War, the United States government brought back many army defenses and started making treaties again with the Plains tribes. The goal was to move native tribes onto reservations so that more white settlers could move in safely. In 1867, the Treaty of Medicine Lodge Creek created a reservation in southwestern Indian Territory for the Comanches, the Kiowas, and the Kiowa Apaches. But the treaty didn't bring peace to Texas. Many Comanches still refused to stay on the reservation and kept raiding settlements across the state. As the Comanche way of life began to disappear, a young Quahati medicine man named Isa Tai, later called White Eagle, tried to bring hope to his people. In 1874, he led a sun dance and promised victory over the white settlers. Comanche warriors attacked buffalo hunters at Adobe Walls, but the attack failed. This defeat led to a harsh response from the United States Army, which launched the Red River War to force all native tribes onto reservations. During this campaign, the United States troops under Colonel Randall S. Mackenzie destroyed a Comanche camp and captured their horses in Palo Duro Canyon. While few Comanches died, the loss of supplies and animals made it impossible for them to survive the winter, and they had no choice but to move to the reservation. By 1875, the Comanche population had dropped to just 1,500 people. Life on the reservation was tough. The government tried to turn Comanche hunters and warriors into farmers and ranchers, pushing them to give up their culture. They struggled with poverty and changes that had been forced on them. Because of this, many Comanches turned to the peyote religion to stay connected as a tribe. The peyote religion was a ceremonial gathering led by a spiritual leader called the roadman. Here's how it usually was done. The ceremony is often held in a teepee or a sacred space and lasts all night. It begins at sunset and ends at sunrise. The atmosphere is quiet, respectful, and deeply spiritual. Peyote is a cactus that contains natural hallucinogens. That is, it's usually taken in the form of dried buttons, which are small, round slices cut from the cactus. Sometimes it's brewed into a tea, which is bitter and difficult to drink. People take peyote to pray, seek healing, connect with their creator, or receive guidance from above. The effects can include visions, deep reflection, or emotional healing. Along with taking peyote, the ceremony includes drumming, singing, prayer, and storytelling. A fire is kept burning in the center of the space as a symbol of a spiritual light. The roadman carefully guides the ceremony to ensure its safety, meaningful, and respectful. Peyote is not casually taken with the Comanches. It's only used as a sacred context. In 1901, the government ended the reservation system and divided the land among individual Comanche families through the Jerome Agreement. Each person received 160 acres, but much of the leftover land was sold to white settlers. Despite protests from the Comanche leaders, the government went ahead. Over time, many Comanches lost their land through unfair deals or financial struggles. And as World War II began, many Comanches left the area for jobs or to join the military. After the war, more and more Comanches moved away to find better opportunities, and their community became increasingly spread throughout. And yet, even then, Comanches rode with pride. They remembered who they were, not enemies, but Nurmurna, the people. Behind the glass cases of Texas museums, ancient Native American artifacts show tales of resilience, survival, and a deep connection to the land. These objects speak of ancestors who viewed the earth as sacred, unsellable, and a gift. Thank you for listening to the Native People Spotlight series on Texas history for kids. I hope you enjoyed it and let me know your thoughts. Hit that subscribe button and follow the show. More importantly, share it with others who might find it interesting too. Don't forget to visit txhistory4kids.com to submit inquiries to Zoe's big question. She may just answer it on the podcast, or you might see it featured on the website. And don't forget, the best Texas stories live just beyond the lessons in your classroom, waiting for you to explore. Stay curious, my friends.